For that, I'll give a bit of context about this meetup. This happens once a month, and the idea is to gather, connect actors of the impact entrepreneurship ecosystem here in Barcelona. So I'm really happy to welcome Martin Smith today, co-founder and CEO of Commonshare. It's his fourth venture, and it's a venture that I find very interesting, especially the problems it tackles. I mean, we all know the impact of retail on the climate, and the challenges it is in terms of supply chain. I mean, where does the product come from, how is it transported, and so on. It's a big challenge to tackle because it's global, it's international by design, because the actors are very big, and bringing solution there is a big challenge. It's a challenge that Martin decided to take up, and is going to tell us a bit about this and his entrepreneurial journey. Martin, thank you for joining.
Awesome, thanks for having me. Well, thank you all for coming. I'm Martin Smith from Commonshare. I will try to get through this quickly, but I thought that maybe it would be useful to talk with you a little bit about Commonshare so you know what it is. We are really focused on UN SDG 12, so responsible production and consumption. And then I'll just talk about kind of the pain of being an entrepreneur for 20 years and why you should seriously consider not doing it. So about the company, we've been around for about 3 years or so. Mostly the challenge of what we're doing is organizing sustainability data, which is a huge challenge, and I'll get into the context of why we're doing that. And I founded the company with one of the original architects of Ruby on Rails, which is a software language, this guy Abdelkader Boudi. He also is one of the 5 guys behind Trailblazer, which is an architecture for microservices in Ruby on Rails, so a really, really smart open source programmer. Essentially, Commonshare is solving a coordination and an incentive problem. And the biggest challenge around why we don't kind of consume more sustainable things is because of an issue around interoperability as it relates to databases. And I know this is kind of esoteric and abstract, but if I want to buy sustainable jeans, I need to know where those sustainable jeans are, and I need to believe that whatever sustainability means in the context of those jeans is actually accurate, and I need to know that there's a verification behind it. Right now, if you look at the B2B space, digital verification is too costly for most consumers. Okay, so the only retailers in the world that can verify that a particular product has a particular sustainability element to it are the Walmarts and the Amazons of the world. As a result of that, every single standard, whether it's fair trade or B Corp or GOTS or Textile Exchange or MSC, or the ways that we define sustainability, each has a piece of the puzzle of what it means to be sustainable, but they have it in different databases, and those databases don't talk to each other. So if I'm a retailer here in Barcelona and I want to source sustainable products, or I'm a consumer and I want to know where around me I can buy sustainable products, what you're really looking at is a data challenge on how to get all of those databases to talk to each other. The challenge around getting those databases to talk to each other is you have 2 types of entities. You have standard owners, which are those that create the standards, like USDA Organic or the EU or Forward Stewardship Council. And then you have certification bodies, which are the organizations that go and they actually audit to those standards. So they go to the farm, they go to the facility, they go to, like when you buy organic food, right? Someone has actually gone to that farm and certified that the soil meets organic standards, right? So the challenge around limited collaboration is because each of these standard owners and certification bodies wants to own their data. And so the question is, how do you get all of these standard owners and certification bodies to work together in one protocol? And that's why we call Commonshare a common protocol for sustainable supply chains. We're trying to build the incentives to get them to work together. And it's mostly, more than anything else, an incentive problem. So what are we doing? We're building a multi-sided platform to empower sustainable businesses through digital traceability, transparency, and trade. For standard owners or scheme owners, these are like FSC, MSC, organic. We're creating kind of a digital assurance layer for them so that any place you see a USD organic logo online or EU eco-label, you essentially know that that's actually accurate. For certification bodies, we're creating an entirely new revenue channel that is similar to carbon credits, but for any abstracted social claim. These are really abstract concepts, so I can kind of break this out in Q&A. For producers and suppliers, we're building a marketplace for them to have direct access to buyers or institutional buyers that are interested in sourcing sustainable goods. And for institutional buyers, we're helping them map their supply chain, identify risks, and then figure out how to transition to circular supply. So the way to think about it is you essentially have two different UX flows in the marketplace. You've got an interaction between retailers and suppliers, those that they're working with today and those that they could work with. And then you have an interaction between whatever is being certified. So if it's an entity, it could be a B Corp. If it's a facility, it could be a factory that's fair trade. If it's a product, it could have particular sustainable content or material within that product that's sustainable. All of those entities are there interacting with certification bodies, which are providing a digital verification of them. So what we've built is effectively this system that allows for collaborative digital traceability down to batch lot. So if I want to know where these jeans came from, all the way down the supply chain, you can do that through Commonshare. And a retailer can work with each of the tiers below it. So it can work with the manufacturer who works with the fabric, with the textile mill can work with the agricultural inputs. We've then built, once you know where your stuff is coming from and the risks in your supply chain, a way to source from new suppliers. So often what will happen as you start managing traceability is your suppliers will say, I don't want to give you access to my next tier. I don't want you to know where I'm getting it from. And so a brand needs to say, okay, if I'm going to comply with regulation, how do I get around that? Well, without a marketplace, you don't have a lot of solutions. And that's why we've deliberately from day one built this in an architecture that has the private compliance architecture with a public marketplace, which is much, much harder to do, especially for a small venture. And then the outcome of all of this is that you go to Corte Inglés, you go to Walmart.com, you go to Carrefour, and anytime you see a logo on their website or in person, you have a middleware layer where every single digital claim could be powered by Commonshare and certified by all of the certification bodies in the pro. So it's a super abstract concept, but where it came from was, how do I know where to find sustainable jeans? And when you get into that problem, it's not a B2C problem, it's a B2B problem, and it's about kind of the interaction between retailers, manufacturers, and certification bodies. So I'll skip through this quickly, but effectively we've built this complete traceability system that I've talked about. We then have this digital authentication at point of sale. And then there is this kind of the big element of what we're doing, and the hardest element of what we're doing is creating this credit system whereby we're trying to put a price on any sort of digital claim, right? So you guys probably know about carbon credits, right? There's a system that's been created so that a ton of carbon costs a certain amount. Right now, the system today around the data around each of these databases, whether it's fair trade or GOTS, et cetera, they don't have a way of kind of pricing model to help them essentially allow anyone to get access to that data. So what we've done is we've built this API architecture that allows for them to share that information anytime a retailer wants to verify that this is, got linen from France and organic cotton from India. That might be done by two different certification bodies. Right now they have to tap into two different databases. Through Commonshare, they can just pay a couple of credits. The certification bodies can integrate into Commonshare and get the verification of whatever the claim is. So vegan, fair trade, GOTS, there's over 1,500 of these different certifications that define what sustainability is depending on the value stream. So that again is kind of how we've created the incentive layer for what we're doing. Then we've kind of built into this a marketplace, right? So if all these brands are bringing on board their supply chains, there's going to be overlap. And so the suppliers themselves have a way to access this marketplace through the platform. So one of the things that is going to happen if we're successful at scale is people are going to worry that we're going to have too much power in the marketplace. Because if we are the digital claims architecture, there's not enough decentralization of Commonshare. So we've taken the digital claims architecture and we've essentially thrown it into an entity called Sustainable Industries that we're incubating. Once a qualified financing happens, and this is legally contracted with our certification bodies, we will have to spin this out so that traceability platforms that compete with us can use the same digital claims architecture. We'll then take 20% of this new entity and we'll give it to the certification bodies based on the number of digital claims that they do, so that the same entity can be owned by Fair Trade and B Corp and all of these different entities together. So this is like a part of the ownership economy, which kind of ties into blockchain and what's happened with crypto in the last 3 years. But effectively what's happened is these new technologies have allowed for the development of what are called marginal stakeholder incentives. You can figure out who the value creating stakeholder is in your ecosystem. And ours, one of them is the certification bodies. Take the marginal action that they're creating. The marginal action here is the digital claim, the digital verification that this shirt was made with organic cotton, and then incentivize them to do that and put a price on it. So we're doing that through the credit model, and then we're going one step further and saying, you know what, this is a good idea. We're gonna have competitors that are gonna do it, and we're throwing a grenade into the cap table and saying 20% is gonna go to the certification bodies so that we have a huge moat around what we're doing. So even the second movers can't actually do this because we're giving away the ownership to all of the entities that would be incentivized to compete with us. Okay, this is a ton of information. I hope some of that made sense. So I'm gonna stop there because if you wanna learn about Commonshare, it's really abstract, okay? It's like this really abstract idea that is really important that we or someone else does to solve some aspects of sustainability. But I understand that like in a presentation in 10 or 15 minutes, it's hard to ingest all of it. So I'm gonna go through some quick lessons learned. I've been an entrepreneur. I dropped out of University of Chicago to start my first business. I then went back to Chicago and finished in economics. I started another business. I sold that business, did the earn out while at Harvard Business School, then rolled up the CSR media space and then sold that business to private equity. So I've worked in sustainability for the last 20 years or so. The last 5 or so years, I've worked in the ownership economy. And overall, I would say entrepreneurship has been a really positive experience, but also one that is quite painful. So as I'm sure many of you founders know, the problem is once you get into it, right? Once you kind of decide that you're gonna play the game, you're always in it, right? So I kind of put some lyrics from songs that I like over here, but like I just try to treat every day like I'm an intern, right? I try to kind of assume that I'm back at that first stage again, willing to do whatever work I have to do, willing to try not to have an ego, willing to do whatever I'm asking my team to do, because most of what I've learned about entrepreneurship is you're building towards something, and it might not be in that venture, right? You might actually fail in that venture, but I've learned more from my failures than from my successes, and my failures have actually made me a better entrepreneur. And so by taking that attitude of just playing the game and treating it like play, I think is a really important aspect of entrepreneurship. The second kind of element of it is that most of the time it sucks, right? If you think about a farmer, most of the time you're up at 5 in the morning, you've got your hands in the dirt, you're not seeing any of your crop, right? You're out there, it sucks. Sometimes you lose your crop. Sometimes you don't have crop insurance, right? And like, even if you lose your crop, and have crop insurance, you still have lost a lot of work. Sometimes there's frost. So I would say 18 of the 20 years felt like this, right? Where you've got your hands in the dirt and you're not seeing it. And I would just say if you're an entrepreneur and you're feeling that, then you're doing something right, because that's what entrepreneurship is. It's kind of this, it's almost like being Sisyphus, right? You're just rolling a rock up a hill all the time. And so often I kind of, commiserate with other entrepreneurs about how hard it is. But again, the problem is once you're in it, there's very little that you can do besides that, right? Even going to be an investor, which I've done for a while, is not as fun as being an operator to some extent. For those of you that have raised money, you'll know this. Investors do not solve this. Investors add a third dimension that make your life even more difficult, okay? So I remember I walked into a boardroom in 2010, and then my 2 board members were the CEO of the Princeton Review, who's now the CEO of Noodle, a really good mentor and investor and advisor of mine, and the guy that was running private wealth management at HSBC, and they told me I had to sell my company. And after 3 hours of crying, I was like, okay, I'll do it. But it took a year to sell the company, right? And when you bring on investors, you're adding a dimension to what you're doing that actually complicates what you're doing. And yes, it's better in a lot of ways because you can actually grow, but you should know that it's not like you raise investment and that's a win. It's like then you actually have to do what you said you were going to do, and now you've essentially hired yourself a boss, right? So one of the nice things about when I sold my company back in 2010 is we immediately were profitable because we merged with a competitor, and we threw off so much cash, we bought out all our investors. And for 5 years, we could run the business ourselves and buy companies before we sold it to private equity, and that was super nice. So if you can get there, that is freedom. Most companies can't get there anymore, and I'll talk a little bit about why. So one of the things I think I've learned in the last 5 years is just how hard and how dirty business can be. Particularly in the last 5 years, I won't go into a lot of context here, but business can be brutal, right? And so you should always be thinking about the incentive structures. So I mean, this is from Chance. He's talking about Chance the Rapper. He's talking about how labels won't let him use samples in their songs because the labels own all of the samples, right? Same sort of thing in business. You need to know the incentive structures in the industry that you're in, because you're going to go into meetings and people are not going to tell you what's actually going on, and you're going to be trying to figure it out. And the reality is that, I went to a meeting a month ago with this firm in France, and I had a call with them today, and it's like, it's very clear they're just going to take our ideas, right? So this is just business, and you just kind of have to get over that and realize that if you're going to be in business, even if it's an impact business, you're going to deal with a lot of shady characters, and you should really try to understand what's going on beyond the water in the industry that you're in, or under the water. The opposite side of that is as soon as you can create incentive alignment and figure out what motivates people, and not judge them for those motivations, but just understand what their motivations are, the more success that you're going to have, right? For me, that was really hard to do in our industry that Commonshare is in, right? The certification bodies are billion-dollar companies. They make all of the money in the space that Commonshare is in. So for 2.5 years, I said, okay, I'm trying to disrupt them. Then I read Machiavelli, or The Prince by Machiavelli, and it's all about when you're a small prince, you need to enrich, the people that are the most powerful, right? And that's how you build your state. So instead, I flipped the model and said, we're going to create this digital incentive where we're not going to compete with your existing revenue, but we're going to essentially create this new verification that's going to drive new revenue to the richest players in the industry. And immediately we started seeing some success with that. So it's kind of going back to understanding the incentive structures. Sometimes you can disrupt it, sometimes you can't. But the more that you can align incentives, I think the easier it's going to be for you and your ventures. So J. Cole, good lyric. But essentially, your competitors are not your competitors, all right? Your competitors see something similar to what you see in the world. They have common vision with you. I merged with my competitor, and everyone ended up a millionaire, all right? So, and we were hardcore competitors for 3 to 4 years. So you should learn from your competitors. You should be in touch with your competitors. You should know what they're doing, but you should have a friendly relationship with them as much as possible. Because again, there's 8 billion people on this planet, and you probably have 20 or 30 competitors, and they have a very common way of, or a very similar way of looking at the world as you. And so that's a really powerful tool over time. And then 2 elements of that I've just kind of learned in kind of personally. I think I lost this. Does anyone know how much Michael Jordan makes a year off of the sale of his sneakers? Yeah. So it's estimated 130 million a year forever. Or that's what it was last year. So this just has kind of has Jay-Z's quote, "I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman." So we live now in a world of superstars, all right? Our economy is incredibly unequal at this point, and AI is only going to make that worse. 70% of AI researchers work for 5 institutions. The only hope is that open source kind of levels the playing field. So once again, my philosophy is do what you can in your career to fix that. There's actually a professor here called Jan Eckhout at UPF. He was at Princeton before. He's a really good macroeconomist, has a really good book that just came out called The Profit Paradox that talks about concentration of industry across all industries. So this is a huge, huge problem for society. But at the same time, you live in that superstar economy. So, don't be a businessman, be a businessman, right? Like you want to essentially take advantage of that dynamic and build a personal brand outside of your business. And that's something I learned late. I sold my company, I went into a minority position, and I lost some of the personal brand for a lot of time. And as much as it kind of pains me to do the personal branding stuff, the reality is that we live in this superstar economy, so you want to be thinking about your individual brand and your business brand as well. And then finally, none of this really works without rest, right? And so like we live again in this world where there's going to be people that are going to work harder, work faster than you. We live in this weird post-capitalist society where people are just willing to kill themselves for their ventures at this point. And there's always going to be someone that does that more than you, because of, again, 8 billion people, concentration of industry, and a lot of poverty. Like those are the dynamics for a really fierce competition. So incorporating rest, incorporating kind of whatever you do to chill, whether it's yoga or meditation or whatever it is, sports, I think is really, really probably the most important aspect of sustaining entrepreneurship over a long period of time. So anyways, I'll stop there. I hope that wasn't totally boring, but that's me, the business, and some things I've learned in a nutshell.
Thank you so much for sharing. How do you go from 0 to 1 here?
It's super hard. So multi-sided marketplaces are very, very difficult. One of the things that's nice about them is you build network effects, you build moats, and if they are successful, they're really successful. But if you're starting a marketplace, happy to talk with you. You're doing the hardest thing that you could do in business in terms of the chicken and egg problem. So it's a longer conversation. There's ways to fake supply. There's ways to fake demand. There's kind of tools. There's venture capitalists that focus exactly on this, like NFX out in San Francisco. But I would say that it's a longer conversation, but it's been 3 years of pain, and we're kind of still at the beginning of the hockey stick growth curve.
And so for you, the supply are the certification bodies, and the demand are the retailers?
The demand are the retailers, and there's multiple sets of retailers, right? So you have multi-vendor retailers that are buying from brands. So if I want to have my products, if I'm Patagonia and I want to have my products carried in Walmart, Walmart's going to increasingly verify the information from Patagonia. Patagonia, because of regulation, like the Uyghur Fair Labor Protection Act, has to know where all of the cotton in their supply chain is coming from. So they have to map down to agricultural inputs. This is anyone who's importing into the US now. If you're in the EU, you have things like the new deforestation law, which means that 11% of goods at the border are going to be checked. You might say forest products, well, I don't do forest products, but many of your shirts, much of your clothing is made from lyocell or modal, right, which comes from a forest. So you have forest products and more things that you would think about. Or you have now the EU product passport, you have the UK Green Claims Law, you have the German Supply Chain Act, you have the Norwegian Supply Chain Act, you have the Canadian Supply Chain Act. All of these are around traceability.
And you put it in...
The abstraction of all of these laws is one of two things. It's either you need to know where your stuff comes from, or if you're going to communicate it at point of sale, you need to have an audit trail. And depending on the regulation and depending on the jurisdiction, the level of depth or how much is going to be audited.
And this intelligence, you plan to integrate it, or is integrated in the platform to allow retailers
Yes.
to basically go for the information depending on their context?
So what happens is that the retailers have some of this information. There's multiple ways that you can get this information. Some of it you get it from your manufacturers. You can do DNA testing to get some of it. So you can actually do DNA testing on particular agricultural strains to understand where stuff comes from. They have some of the information. The certification bodies have some of the information. So it's how do you build the interoperable layer for all of these different players to interact, and how do you build the incentives to get them to interact? Again, I talked to a certification body today, one of the largest in the world, and this guy was honest with me on the phone. I've been working with them for 2.5 years. We don't have a contract yet. And he's like, look, my management team of this billion-dollar company thinks we need to own this. And I'm like, well, have you started building it? No. Do you have a team to build it? No. Are you going to hire a team to build it anytime soon? No. So it's like, well, then do it with us, right? So it's like, you have to like figure out the incentives to get people to actually work with you.
Yeah, so like the sense of urgency is not the same for everyone.
It's urgent now because of the regulations. Okay. So all of this stuff was nice to have. And like, if you want to look at, if you're interested in kind of this particular topic, you should just look at regulation EU supply chain in the news, in Google News, and you won't believe how many new regulations have come up in the last like 3 to 4 years, and specifically in the last 6 months. So all of this is going to be pushed into the mainstream.
So EU is a good place to focus on. How about the pricing strategy? Because you come to bring a solution where right now there is not something that necessarily is being used, so you are asking people to pay on top of something that they were probably not needing to pay so far. So like,
I don't think we've totally figured it out. We know that manufacturers won't pay a lot, so they're very there's a lot of elasticity in pricing at the manufacturer side. So elasticity just means that as the price goes up, supply goes down, or demand goes down rather. At the brand level is mostly bespoke solutions. So the question is, how do you price it at a level where it becomes less bespoke, right? Because you can get $1 million contract or €1 million contract with a brand, but you're building a bespoke solution and you're integrating into their PLM, you're integrating into their systems, right? Mm-hmm. So what you want to get to is a solution that's productized, and we're just starting to get there in terms of, and I think at the high end, at the largest companies, we'll just say no to them over time because the solution has to become too customized. We'd rather be at kind of the small to medium company.
Around the recruitment part, so a big part of this early stage, how many are you now in the team?
26 or 27.
So 26, so it's already quite some numbers, and you started in 2020.
Yeah. And
you're still in that phase where basically you're creating, you're building that product, finding that product market fit, and so you're still in that phase, just arriving at seed stage. How do you define you to recruit first? I mean, from 1 to 25, like how did you build up your team? What was the rationale behind that?
Yeah, so in 2008, I mean, I was young. I was 24 or something. I raised a couple million for my business, and I couldn't find developers in New York. No one wanted to work on sustainability back then. One thing that they don't tell you is a lot of developers are only in it for money. So actually finding developers that want to work on impact stuff is quite hard. It's just like any other type of person. So I moved to India. I moved to Pune, India, and partnered with a couple of guys in Pune, India, and we ended up building up a team there. And it was there that I said, I will always be connected to engineers now, because if I don't have engineers that I'm working with, and I don't have them as team members, and my co-founders rather than outsourced, then I'll never be able to do what I want to do. So for me, it was always about finding engineers that I could not only like work with, but get along with. So when I started this venture, my co-founder, Abdel, he's originally from Morocco. We just started working on a part-time basis together. We thought we would hire like one person in Morocco. I started going down there. I go there almost every month now. So like I want to hire as many people as I can in Morocco at this point.
Which city?
Tangier.
Okay.
Yeah, and so my philosophy is start with engineers, because this depends on what product you're in, and then you need really good data, and then you need really good sales and marketing, and it may be, depending on the business, you might start with sales and marketing, right? So another way to do it is just to go out and sell contracts in advance, where you're selling as much as you can, using that to raise venture capital, and then building your engineering team. But for me, what I learned is that I found it so hard to hire engineers that I never wanted to be into this position where I didn't have an engineering team. And so that was just my philosophy.
And how did your role evolve? Because I imagine, and I hear you are in a lot of conversation with like the key stakeholders from the value chain, but like, is it 100% of your time? Like, how did your role evolve? And where do you put the weight of your energy, your resources, personal resources right now within the organization?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we're under-financed, right? So and we've done that. I think we did it deliberately because we thought we could get to cash flow break even without raising. And then all these new regulations came into effect, and our competitors are starting, pieces of those competitors are raising, you know, $10, $50 million. So we'll have to go out and raise a real round now. So my role should be focused on three things. It should be focused on sales, it should be focused on hiring talent, and should be focused on raising money. Like, that's really the only three things that I should be doing and that I'm probably competent at. I'm doing too much on product now, but that's a function of being underfinanced. So like properly financed, properly utilized, my role should be those three things: sales, hiring, and fundraising.
And I can feel you're passionate about the product too.
Well, I'm passionate about the problem, right? Like, I don't, like, do you guys know where to buy sustainable stuff in the city? I don't, you know, I'm trying to build this thing.
But
so.
it's difficult to let it go as well, no, I guess.
Yeah.
How, like, did you succeed in your previous ventures to let go of the product early on?
Yeah, no, I did not know. I should let go sooner, yeah.
No, but at the same time, like, especially in the beginning, and just to, I think, like, if you have the closest loop between sales and product, is the best. So if your sales and your product, you have the continuous customer feedback, and it's needed to develop the product, so it makes total.
I would like to cultivate that. I'd like to cultivate that without me. You know, that would be ideal. I don't know how to do that.
And you feed the information and the team.
Yeah.
But it's a big change to find someone that is able to get your level of understanding early on the customer and market need. Okay, and well, a lot of questions again on the product, on the solutions. That I think I'll transition just quickly. A couple of questions on your personal story. What made you? I mean, you're talking a lot about. A lot of what you describe it's tough. A lot of what you describe is, I mean, money is in a lot of aspects a key element for decision and so on. So money is there all around. What made you focus 20 years ago or decide to focus on sustainability?
Well, I don't know if people know economics at the University of Chicago. I mean, economics at Chicago it's probably the best economics program in the world. It's also the one most grounded in fantasy, and so, Chicago's economics don't apply to the real world, right? It's based on mathematical models that, once you get into real customers or real consumers, and you could see that with people there. You could see kind of that it's influencing people's, brains and in terms of what they valued and how they thought about value creation. And so I think it almost felt like that first venture felt like an imperative that I had to do it because it wasn't toxic, that's not the right word, because I really like a lot of Chicago economists now. But at the moment, at age 18, you kind of felt like there was this knee-jerk reaction to like, oh my God, this is so crazy. So that's why sustainability then, yeah.
Okay. And so you made an exit, so you had this chance, not a lot of entrepreneurs go to that happy outcome.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are always positive outcomes by the learning of entrepreneurship in itself, and I would like to mention it as well because looking for an exit as an objective to be an entrepreneur is probably the wrong objective because you won't enjoy the journey. But so you had this outcome. Like, what made you start again? And go now and be in front of us telling us that you're struggling, you're hand in the mud for the last.
I think ego. I think if I didn't have an ego, I wouldn't have started again. I mean, I didn't have a crazy exit. I didn't build like $1 billion company, right? So I don't have my yacht, and that wouldn't be sustainable. So, I think going back to that first slide, once you start playing the game, there's very few things in life that are like starting a company, and so it becomes hard to get to this stage, right? So this quote is all about like how this guy, is a hip hop artist. He needs his lyrics, but they're literally like rapping is what's killing him. He needs to rest, right? So I think it was A, the social need and the concern. It was B, interest in the topic, and it was C, once you start a venture, for those that are serial entrepreneurs in here, it's very hard to not be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. By the way, I thought we should have put some hip hop music.
Next time.
Next time, I'll check better the name of the the speech and
Okay.
do the appropriate music to
Cool.
welcome you.
Very exciting, very exciting.
Okay. On the personal side and the entrepreneurship journey, what has been and you can mention in here in Commonshare or in the previous one, like the main driver that helped you go through the tough times.
But I think the team is really, really important, and having a co-founder is really important. There's all sorts of problems with that as well in terms of the cap table, but that's another conversation.
Yeah. Actually, transition to my last question around investment. When do you decide, and maybe you can give some examples of your different experiences, when do you know if you need to raise money or not, and if this is the right time? How can you decide as an entrepreneur, okay, that's now, that's the amount, that's like, what would be your suggested approach there?
I think it depends on the business, right? So like my former CTO is starting a really cool AI startup right now where you can talk to it and you upload like a file or a database, you talk to it and it becomes your data analyst. It spits out charts and graphs to you, which OpenAI can also do. But I think he'll be able to do some nuance on it. He needs capital, right? He's got to go out and raise 10 or 20 million because of the dynamics of the competition in his industry. For me, I wanted to get Commonshare to cash flow break even. I didn't want to raise VC. I generally think working with investors are, look, I wanted freedom, right? And that when you have an investor, again, you have a fiduciary responsibility, you've got a board, it's a different dynamic.
And external pressure.
Yeah. With that external pressure, I think is good because your investors also bring you a lot of information. They help you if they're good investors. So I think it really depends on the industry, and it depends on your personal goals. If you can build a profitable enterprise that allows you to live the life you want to live, and you don't have to raise an external investment, and your ego allows you to do that, then that's what I would do. That seems like a better life. You can go to the beach, you can kite surf, right? This industry, maybe I could have done that 18 months ago, but now so much money has come into climate tech that it's going to be, just to compete, we're going to have to raise capital.
Is it a market take all type of industry, you think?
No, it's too fragmented. And there's different industries, right? Like we work in apparel, but there's cosmetics, there's food, right? We're working as a marketplace, we're working as a compliance platform, like each of these are segmented. So
that would not be an additional reason to raise fast a lot?
The traceability,
you can find your space as well.
Yeah, I mean there's network effects in this space that I worry about, but there was a player in this space called, I'm forgetting the name, Sarai, that raised 70 million from HSBC for a supply chain solution and went out of business overnight. So it's not necessarily just a lot of capital that is going to solve this problem. I think it's more this incentive problem. How do you get the different certification bodies to work together? Yeah. If you figure that out, then the problem gets solved by itself.
It's almost more a political...
yeah, it's a political issue. Yeah, exactly. It's a commons, right? So if you guys know, like Elinor Ostrom was a Nobel-winning economist that did a lot of work on commons. Commons is a very specific type of good in economics. This is a commons. You essentially have a commons problem here. Yeah. So again, a longer conversation.
Indeed, and as said, it was my last question, so I'll open it to everyone here. If you have any question, Martin is here, has some time for us. Please go.
I have a question actually about exit, if you can share more how it was after the exit happened, because I think it can be similar to investment. Startup things that you sell the company, you can go on the beach and relax, but it depends a lot on all the requirements and things. So I don't know what you're allowed to share or not.
Yeah. No, I'm doing a dual career PhD right now at the research arm of the UN in Maastricht on governance, specifically because of what I learned from the exits. So I've exited a couple companies, and you can get screwed in so many ways on an exit. And so you should have a really good lawyer when you're involved in an exit. So in my exit where I made the most money, I had to sign a 5-year non-compete. I got paid out over 5 years. I was in a minority board position. I was the chair of the board, and the CEO almost committed fraud against the investors that had come along as part of the exit. And so we went through a 1.5 year long battle. It didn't get legal, but it was like a battle to essentially create the right incentives post-exit to ensure that everything that was supposed to happen did happen. And that's, again, a longer story, but like I've seen so many exits of friends now, so many exits of colleagues, things that I've invested in where we've exited. And so the negotiation on the exit is as important as the negotiation on investment. And there's so many different nuances to it. But I mean, if you have a specific question, I can answer it, but it's probably a longer conversation.
No, I just wanted to
Yeah.
hear your opinion experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just hire a good lawyer. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
You talked a bit about like co-founders and partners, so I was wondering, did you do all of your ventures with a co-founder? Do you have any tips there on like picking the right person?
I think the ideal kind of framework for if it's a tech venture, right, is that there is a entrepreneur that has domain expertise that partners with a technical partner. And I think it's ideal that the entrepreneur with domain expertise has a majority of the cap table. Okay, so I don't think that the 50-50 co-ownership thing ever really works. And so it's like a marriage without sex. It's really, really hard. And so I've seen it work, but I've more seen it work where you have like 70-20, right? Or 70-20-10 in terms of and to the extent that you can build value in securing contracts or something else before you find that technical co-founder, or if you're a technical person and you're the CEO, vice versa, right? But I think where you get into problems is in these 50-50 or 33-33-33, because as soon as you raise a round of capital, like you game theory it out, the investor who owns 20% with one of those three co-founders now can get over a majority, right? So if you have some sort of big issue that you're dealing with, you've got to always be thinking about the dynamics between the co-founder and the investor. So my mentor, this guy, I mean, he's a ruthless entrepreneur, but a really good guy. He started the Princeton Review, took it public, started 2U, took it public, is running Noodle now, $150 million a year business, we'll take it public. He always had the ability to put the first money in to maintain the cap table. So we always had control of the cap table to the extent that you can build value or maintain the cap table and structure it a bit more, not in like a 50-50 way, I think is really important. If you have to structure it in a 50-50 way, then you really need to have a founder's agreement and vesting schedules. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was also wondering, like in terms of personality and like if you ever had, like how well should you know the other person before?
I can tell you right now, my CTO and I are like this. We do not get along in a lot of ways. Like this guy is a genius, and any genius comes with a lot of baggage. But like we are like brothers almost, and that's really helpful. In the venture before this, I had a co-founder, and it was more like this 70-10% or 70-20-10% split, and it went pretty well. Personality-wise, I think you just need to agree on values more than anything else and why you're doing it, and having that conversation early on. And also just understanding the risk appetite, right? Like if your co-founder has kids, right, it's a different risk appetite than, or like what their needs are, I think is really critical. So, yeah.
If I understood correctly, you mentioned that at some point you realized that you could become too powerful, and so the risk of, I guess that diminishing trust or transparency, so you decided to make it easy for other companies to do something similar to what you do.
Yeah.
So you mentioned blockchain, so I would like to know how that really works. Is that like an actual blockchain implementation with open source, or you make it easy for other centralized entities?
Yeah. So I'll answer the question. I run a podcast with a VC here in Barcelona called The Ownership Economy, and the whole idea of the 65 episodes over the past year and a half on this podcast are this question. Okay, how do you do this, right? So like the challenge of market power today is that you have too much market power in every industry, right? And so we experience this when we see Zuckerberg owns the majority of Meta. There's no investor protections. They consume all of our data. There's very little we can do about that, even with EU regulation. So you see that with Amazon. You see that with Spotify. All of these entities have too much market power. And I could talk about all of them in length or give you books to read about why they have too much market power and how we've moved out of this phase of capitalism into some sort of weird post-capitalism corporatocracy. But that kind of economics aside, what we're doing is we're saying we're doing two things. Part of it is self-interested and part of it is a reality. We're working backwards from success. So there's like Bayesian probability, right? You work backwards from success and you look at how to get there. So we're saying if we're successful, what'll be the reasons why people won't want to work with us? Well, if we're successful and we work with all the certification bodies and we work with a set of retailers, there's going to be a different set of retailers that are going to be working with other traceability platforms, right? And if they're not integrated into our traceability platform, then you're never going to have a standard. So we know that the other traceability platforms won't work with us because we have our own traceability solution, right? So the digital claims element of what we're doing, we're spin it out into a new entity once we know it's going to be successful, but we're creating the legal framework for what success means now, before we're successful. So we don't have the incentive, once we're successful, to say, yeah, let's not do that, let's just own the monopoly, right? The way that we're doing it is we're essentially taking a portion of the cap table, we're allocating it to the people that create value in this ecosystem, the certification bodies, and we're saying, if you participate with us, when we spin it out, you will get a portion of the cap table based on the number of verifications that you could do. But you could use it, it's like, you can think of it in the abstract of whoever's creating value. So for Cabify, it'd be the Cabify drivers, right? You need to solve the problem of supply. For Airbnb, it'd be the hosts, right? For Amazon, it could be the suppliers, right? So you just think about who creates value in my business. How do I take the marginal event that they're doing to create value and tie it to the enterprise value or tie it to the transaction that's happening, and then incentivize them either through earning mechanisms like profit sharing or quasi-equity, or through governance rights like a right to vote. And if you want to go into these business models, I can send you a bunch of stuff. So
What's the name of the podcast?
the ownership economy.
I'm just curious where regenerative products sit in this.
Yeah, so there's regenerative standards that we're working with on the platform. So Regenerative Organic Alliance in the States. There's like, I see it as kind of a spectrum, and the vast majority of companies are just trying to figure out like sustainability at this point. There are a set of companies that are starting to think about regenerative or circular economies, but it's a very small portion of them. The way that we think about it is, I think the most tangible way to think about it is materials. So we will have an index of materials on Commonshare that launches next week that are all based on the certifications. And as more and more materials become circular or become regenerative, we'll incorporate them into that index. They'll then be incorporated into the products. Most of what we're doing is a product-based database, and so that's how we think about it. But there's other kind of ways that regenerative businesses can be on Commonshare based on the standards and certifications. But a lot of the regenerative certifications haven't been developed yet because regenerative standards, it's really hard because it's really based on the locality, right? What's regenerative here in Catalonia is not regenerative in Madrid. So
There's no certification body doing regenerative.
there is now. So A Greener World in the UK is doing it. Has a regenerative certification. Regenerative Organic Alliance in the US has a regenerative certification. So there's 5 or 6 regenerative certifications now.
Yeah, you mentioned a personal brand. How do you manage your personal brand?
This podcast. So I do. That's all I can do is the podcast. Like preparing for a podcast is way more work than you can imagine. So, but I'll turn the podcast into a course now, and we're doing an event at the UN, which Katie is helping a lot with. That's on the ownership economy. So like trying to kind of this is what I really care about is the macroeconomic stuff. I mean, I care about the sustainability stuff, but like I'm really passionate about the macroeconomic stuff. I haven't done a good job, you know, so I wouldn't look at me as an example. But I think it's really important in the economy that we live in, and I hate it. You know, I think like if any of you are influencers, you know, well, I'll be positive. Like I don't like that aspect of our economy, but I also think it's really important given how the economy works today. So,
for a B2B or even B2G business like Commonshare, where you can't just sort of go out into the street and do your research and find your first customers, how did you find them? How important
Connections.
is your network? And for the majority of people who don't have friends in workplaces, how would you recommend finding those connections?
yeah, I think that, so, you know, I talk a lot with friends about this because I'm like racking my brain for more personal connections right now because our sales cycle is super long. And in terms of your question of how to do it without connections, it's a good question. I don't want to give a BS answer. I'll think about it. I think this is why most successful entrepreneurs, they're doing something that they learned they could do better from their previous job. So if you look at most successful entrepreneurs, they did something in their previous job, they learned something, and then they tweaked something about what that domain, and then went on to do something in that domain. I didn't do that, which I should have done. You know, I started in sustainability really young, and I didn't come from wealth, you know, so I didn't have the connections. I just started really young, and so I built the connections over time. So I would think if you don't have connections, I would think about the domain where you have expertise and what you see in your job that can be done better, or even in your startup that can be done better to start there, because that's again how most of the most successful entrepreneurs are successful, except for the ones that we hear about, like Zuckerberg, or like, you know, these people who started really early and created these really abstract, what are effectively utilities. So.
The last question. Yeah, that's two questions. Let's go.
Yeah. How did you and your co-founder meet, and how do you recommend that SEO meets SCTO and vice versa?
I was lucky. I met him. He's a very famous open source programmer, and I lived in the Dominican Republic for a while, and I was working with a Dominican programmer who had worked with him in the past. And so we needed some help on some architecture. He came on board on a part-time basis, and then I was like, wow, this guy's a genius. And so we started working. We couldn't afford him at the time, so when we could eventually afford him, we hired him. I would go through accelerators. So there's a lot of accelerators. Like the Barcelona ecosystem in 5 years is going to be the Silicon Valley of Europe. Like, this is the best place to live in Europe. There's a lot of smart people, so I would just hold on for the ecosystem to be built. But this will be the best place to be. I think that this will be the best place to be an entrepreneur in Europe in 5 years. And so those accelerators will come if they're not here today, where you can meet technical co-founders. And I would look at, God, what's the name of it? There's a specific worldwide program for meeting technical co-founders as well. I'll forget, or I'll remember the accelerator, and I'll get your contact info, or I'll send it to you.
And actually, we have an accelerator here today. Elena from Startup Wise, guys, if you have questions around.
We invest in B2B SaaS, so not only Impact, but Impact as well.
Yeah. Rafael?
I'm just curious about the building all this ecosystem or the platform below an ecosystem to fit that all this ecosystem, and how that China fits here in terms of the supply elements or members, no, stakeholders.
Yeah.
Is that an issue, a problem, all this certification and the
China, the country.
Yeah, China and all the as the largest platform as a supplier, let's say,
Yeah.
no, with all, is that an issue for you? Or?
Yeah, it is. So in the U.S., the situation is more tense in the U.S. It's less tense in the EU, but I think it'll get more tense in the EU. Depending on what happens in Ukraine. in the US, there's a law called the Uyghur Fair Labor Protection Act. The Uyghur Fair Labor Protection Act essentially says that you can't source anything from the Uyghur Autonomous Region in China. There is a law on the Chinese books that says that you can't enforce, as a Chinese supplier, you cannot enforce any US law around supply chain traceability that limits sourcing from a particular region. So these two laws, if you're a brand, are an exact opposite to one another. And it's not exactly clear how it's going to be solved. So brands are really struggling with this. So some of them are moving supply out of China. What a lot are doing is genetic testing. So they're doing DNA testing to make sure that their stuff isn't coming from that region, because you can essentially look at the cotton strain, and based on the soil and some other things, I don't really understand it, but you can figure out where it's coming from. So, but it's a huge problem, and I think like it is the problem of the next 10 to 15 years in terms of resiliency and supply chains. And I'm not sure how it gets solved, because I think the tension between the US and China is just going to get worse.
All right. Well, you will be here with us for
Yeah,
next
sure.
hour, so if there are more questions, of course. This is often how it happens, is that you will not be able to move from here because
We've got water now.
Joking aside, I mean, I'm personally very grateful that there are guys like you that try to tackle such challenges. I think we are more and more consumers who try to take a more responsible behavior, but face challenges to find information we want and so on. And because of convenience, then we would go to the old way of buying. And I think we want to change that. And the more it's made easy for us, the better. And the public, the regulation, the certification are there, but indeed they need support. So I think there are a lot of planets that align for this to be successful. I wish it. And I send a lot of energy in that direction. Thank you for sharing so openly with us. The behind the scene, that's amazing. So please, a big round of applause.